Hi, I'm Melissa Leger, and welcome to Uplift's webinar series. Today, we're here to talk about money and how people might be able to shift their mindset with practical tools and tips. I'm thrilled to announce Treasa Moran, founder of Anchor Point Wealth Advisors. Treasa is an advisor who truly brings a holistic lens to her work, blending financial strategy with the emotional and psychological factors that shape our money decisions. Her practice is rooted in supporting clients through every layer of their financial journey, and she has a particular passion for empowering women to build confidence, clarity, and long-term stability. Thanks for being here with us today, Treasa.
Thanks so much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we like to get started with all of our guests with one big question so they can get to know you a little bit better. So one question I have for you is, what don't you spend enough time doing?
It's a great question. And I'd have to say, practicing meditation is something that I'd love to be doing more of. I find when I do get in those moments where I'm able to reflect and just clear out the noise of life and work, I love to do it in nature. And I tend to do visualization meditation. I'll give a plug for Shakti Gawani and her work, but whenever I do it, I do come away feeling refreshed and a lot of times get new insights on just different topics. So it's definitely something I wish I did more in my daily practice, but love when I do it.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, I'm a big fan of mindfulness myself. What do you think kind of gets in the way of doing it regularly?
I think it's discipline and just building in habits, and we'll be talking about that with money. But so many things are interrelated in our lives, and it's just setting up those structures where it's part of a schedule. It's easy to get away from it, but once you are doing it, you feel, as you know, just invigorated and recharged. So. I think it's just, building in the system so that we don't forget about that it's something, the self-care piece is, really necessary.
Yeah, and I know we'll be talking about habits and systems later, but yeah, I think just in one area of your life, you can transfer those skills to another area from meditation to finance to working out, whatever it is.
Exactly, exactly.
All right. Well, hey, I don't know about everyone else, but when it comes to our webinar today, I know for me, I was brought up never to talk about religion, about politics, about money, which I think is really odd because now it seems like everyone's talking about politics all the time. It's like on TV, it's in conversations, it's like everywhere you go. But money, specifically personal finances, still seem to be pretty taboo for a lot of people. And I know for me, in a past life, I was in finance and I love talking about money, not necessarily like for what you can get out of it or like anything greedy, but I do feel that money really helps people reach their goals to be able to support themselves and others. It also is so important in just whatever line of work that you do to make that time matter. So I know you're focused in on managing finances holistically. Can you share a little bit more about how that works and what that means in your practice?
Yeah, and I'd say I think we clicked right away when we first met because of this shared interest and understanding of money, and particularly as women, right? And women in business, it's extremely empowering when we take control of our money and finances, and bring each other up. So for me, I found my love of things finance going back to my college days. I have been in financial services, the industry for 20 plus years now. And what I'd say is while in school, you learn all about the technical aspects, and that I think historically has been what has been the focus of money. The true heart of it all, in my opinion, is really understanding the psychology and our mindset surrounding money. So it doesn't matter how much money is in the bank, but if we have an understanding of our mindset, our framework of what does money mean to us, our money story. There's a lot of work that's been done, Brad Klontz and colleagues out of Nebraska, on money mindsets. And so that's something I spend a lot of time with my clients on, trying to identify, what money really means to you, and is how does your past influence your current relationship with money, and is that serving you well, or is there something that might need to shift there?
Yeah. And would you say there's any sort of, with your clients, maybe some common thread or overall theme that you see with a majority of your clients, or at least a bulk of them?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think, it's a great question. It really is so personal. So what I'll share is that it really comes down to, the themes are, subtle stories that we heard while growing up, it have a big influence. So for myself, I grew up in a very traditional household where my dad controlled the purse strings. My mom raised, I was the oldest of five girls, was a homemaker, and the power really was with my father. It was the mantra of work hard and the money will follow. He was first generation from immigrants from Ireland, and he exceeded all sorts of, wealth barriers, if you will, that his family set out. What's interesting is the relationship that my mother had, and the influence. It was always getting educated, that we could do anything we put our minds to. But I did notice that there was a lack of financial empowerment with my mom. And so I think, as a woman, going out in the workforce, it became very important to me to be, build my own life, build my own career. I got married later in life. It wasn't about finding a man to support me. And so, that story of money, shaped a lot of who I am today. Some of the other themes I'll see, from folks might be, and you hear this constantly on Shark Tank and other forums about entrepreneurs. When you grew up with, with not a lot of goods, there's often a drive to succeed, to give back, to give to your family what you were missing, in your own life. And so, and perhaps there was a little of that in my father. For me, it's interesting. I grew up with the comforts of wealth, but it didn't shape me in a way that, spoiled me or caused me in a weird way. It almost shaped me to know that money doesn't bring happiness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, um, about getting that education outside, like once you leave. Because for me, it was the same thing. Once I got out of college, my first job was in a financial firm, specifically on their personal finance side. And even though I'm not in finance anymore, I'm like so grateful for that, because I was also raised, if you work hard, if you get an education, it's all going to work out for you. And what I've kind of learned over time is, especially now, we see the layoffs and things happening all the time. It's not just like working hard and getting the education, it's what you're doing with the money and having the money work for you.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'd go a step further too in the work I do with folks. It's not enough to, work hard for the sake of earning money, right? I think, we're in a time where it matters, what are your values? What are you living the life that you want to live? And money is a piece of that, but let money reflect who you are as a person. I think the more secure we feel in our own skin, with our own soul's journey, the deeper that we'll, the stronger a relationship will be with money. We can have a healthier relationship if we're, following our calling, if you will. But it's complex. So, it's definitely a journey, and, just taking awareness, getting awareness of yourself, and, how your past has shaped you, I think is quite important and valuable insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to know a little bit more. Can you tell us more about identifying maybe someone's money scripts, and how do you help one of your clients uncover that?
Yeah, and I referenced earlier Brad Klontz. So there was a lot of great leaders in our field that are doing the work on this topic of behavioral finance, for the management of of money. And so Brad Klontz has developed a money scripts inventory. You can go online and Google his name and actually take the self-assessment yourself. And so, it essentially, groups, I'd say broadly into two categories. Those scripts that are keeping you rich in spirit, money vigilance, and those scripts that might be underserving you, keeping you poor in spirit, and not serving you well. And so there's a lot of, again, this questionnaire. It's kind of a, on a scale range. How do you feel about different topics of money? But what I think is useful is, identifying and reflecting on, what is my relationship with money like? And is it holding me back? Am I finding that, when the mail comes that and bills are coming, that I am avoiding that at all costs? Peeking under the hood to see, what is it that might not be serving you so well. So exercises like this inventories are great, and many others that we'll do in our work together. But identifying what your how your past has shaped you, and a lot of that is really subconscious. And so we're not necessarily aware of the influence of sometimes marquee events. Journaling, I think, can be a great way to, uncover some of these things.
Yeah. And how do you think that awareness, because that's essentially what this is, like an awareness exercise, right? How do you see that awareness help support your clients with their relationship with money?
Yeah, I think, and it's, we're blending a little bit of financial therapy, right, with practical skills that you do with a coach and different things. But, I'd say, like with therapy, right, if we don't realize how something is shaping us, we're not going to be able to change it, And so there's a story that I share sometimes in some of my talks about a monk that goes up to pray on a mountaintop and spend a few days in prayer at the top of the mountain, and very tired, coming down. It's now dark, and in the distance he sees what appears to be a snake, and he gets extremely anxious and wound up, and all sorts of anxiety over that, in the distance, and lights a match, finally only to see that it's actually a rope in front of him. And so too it is with, things that we build up in our minds about how stressful things can be. There's another psychiatrist I work with on some talks, Dr. Prudy Gorgashan, and she had this great chart about the anxiety we feel when we're thinking in advance about dealing with that topic. So if it's, having a difficult conversation with a boyfriend, a husband, or, addressing, that there's not enough money in my bank account to pay my bills, your anxiety will shoot up. That is a fact. But over time, what happens is it actually starts to go down after you address it. And so, by shedding some light on things, getting some awareness, I think it really helps alleviate a lot of anxiety and then allow somebody to move forward. What appeared to be so scary is actually a lot in our own mind. And, I'd say, again, like we said in the start of the talk, is that it doesn't matter how much wealth you have. These are issues that are universal. You're not alone in feeling any kind of anxiety over navigating finances. It's uncomfortable for a reason.
And I'm curious about that too. What would you say to someone who doesn't maybe have a handle on their finances and might feel either super behind or ashamed?
That is a great point. And like I said up at the get-go, it's just very common. We are not taught these topics typically, and as you said, speaking about money has been taboo. And so when you're not comfortable with something, there can be discomfort. The great news is that there are small steps you can take to start empowering yourself and get knowledgeable. You don't need to become a financial guru, a financial expert. With the internet, I mean, you can Google anything today, and I'll share later different specific resources, but the first step is that you want to address something. And, I'd also say that it's very common, maybe it's similar with therapists, but you might identify that you want the help, but life has a way of presenting us with all sorts of curveballs, whether it's a divorce, a death of a loved one, a death of a spouse, that could be the main breadwinner. It could be losing a job, as you've mentioned, a lot of corporate layoffs. And so a lot of times we're forced to deal with some of these things. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have to deal, come to reckoning of, what does that look like? And I think, it kind of leads us to there are definitely some steps you can take to put yourself in a better place.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned these small steps, right? Because when it comes to money, I think it can be so overwhelming for people. But really, there's a lot of small steps that people might be able to take to really start taking control. What do you think are some quick steps that our audience can do to assess their situation?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing, if there's one thing to take away from this talk, it would be this, and it's know your numbers. And what I mean by that is knowing what you have in your assets and your liability columns. And so assets, that's going to be any of your old retirement plans at work you may have forgotten about, any IRAs that you've opened, employee stock that you might have, those all fall in the asset category. Um, your home, if you own a home, knowing what your mortgage, your value of that home is, and knowing your liabilities. So part of the equation is knowing what are those debts, right? What does student loan debt look like? What does credit card debt look like? Any home equity lines of credit? Just knowing what all of those numbers are is going to be very empowering. Again, it can be a rough exercise for those that haven't looked under the hood. You can also find money, which is wonderful. If you've worked at a couple of companies earlier on in your career that you've forgotten about, you can actually look up old 401ks. So you may actually find assets, which would be great. But the first thing I'd say is to know those numbers, know what you have. The second thing that's really important and great to do at the beginning of the year, especially, is knowing what your expenses are, right? Creating a budget can be another really effective and important exercise. Anyone going through job transition, and I work with a lot of folks that do get laid off. I've been laid off several times in my career as well. There are fixed expenses and variable. Fixed are those that are set each month, like your mortgage, your electricity, your food. Variable are going to be things like spending on entertainment, clothing, travel. Know what that bottom line number is. When going through, and a lot of times when I'm working with folks that go through this exercise, you find that there are fees on your credit cards that you're not even aware of. Cutting the cord is common today. You might be paying for lots of different subscription services you don't use. So going through that is a really great exercise. So knowing your numbers first, reviewing a budget second, and then lastly, keep it simple with setting some small goals. And I can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm just thinking people might do this exercise and then they might be like, oh, expletive. Um,
Yeah.
so once they have the awareness, right? They have the awareness, they've gone through their assets, their liabilities, their expenses. It can kind of be overwhelming for some people once they see
Yeah.
those numbers, especially if they haven't done it before. So what are maybe some small goals that people can take that feel really achievable?
Yeah, and that I would say is key. And when you set grandiose goals, like at the beginning of the year, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. We go to the gym, and everybody starts going to the gym, and then it tails off extremely quickly. Because motivation, it's not easy to stay motivated. So one way to do that, to kind of help us, what psychologists say is to start small. So for those that are working, it might be as simple as increasing your 401k percentage. Each year there's a set allowance, but if you're unable to say max out that contribution, increase your percentage. Maybe you're contributing 5%, contribute 6% this year. Start small. Automated ways to save money. So if you're self-employed, you might want to send some extra money to savings every month. Just do an automatic investment plan. Send it right to your savings, but automate that process. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to do. So, do little steps. There's a story of a physician that was trying to get her patient to stop drinking soda. He needed to lose weight. He was drinking 5, 6 liters a day. You don't quit cold turkey. You cut that down. Cut it by one a day for a month. See how you're feeling. So start small. I think the budget exercise could be another great one. And for those that are in a good position where you're making good money, there's some really great opportunities for small business owners to sock away more, whether it's in a self-employed retirement account, a SEP account, or start a 401ks today. There's a lot of great ways to save your taxes on your business side, but also adding benefits for your employees that are available today.
Yeah. And I really like something small, like 1%. Am I going to notice 1% in my savings? Maybe, but for a lot of people, probably maybe not, right? So what are those things that feel really, really achievable, really, really empowering versus something that's really stressful?
Exactly. And then build from there, and anyone that's out of work, the focus on the expense side. And you will be able to find things. And then, in the gig economy, I'd say there are a lot of extra ways to make more income, right? If you are struggling, whether it's online doing gig work in your field as a consultant, or the running errands, the Uber driving, you name it. There's just a lot of flexible ways today. And for most of us, the trajectory is not a straight line, especially those that are entrepreneurs know all the work that's underneath the mountaintop, right? It's peaks and valleys, and hard, consistent work is what leads to success. Spending less than we make and savings are the keys to building wealth. It's slow and steady on the route to wealth. You might have that outlier folks that make their millions, but what came before that? A lot of self-sacrifice. It's slow and steady. There's an oldie but goodie book, The Millionaire Next Door, that talks about profiles of millionaires, and they aren't typically those that are making millions of years. They did profiles in small town USA. It was a family of four where they make, say 150 grand a year. They live in a modest home. They're not driving the fanciest car, but they're saving. They're saving consistently. And so I think there could be misconceptions that you need to be making millions a year. I'll say from seeing it from the other side, those that make millions a year oftentimes are spending millions a year. And so you can really build wealth by spending less than you make and saving.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that, success isn't a straight path, which I think is a really great call out, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, right? And so managing money can be really challenging when the environment is so volatile. What are some ways that you think or what are some ways that you tell clients to help manage some of this uncertainty while still trying to build up their wealth and their ability to reach their goals?
Yeah, it's a great point, and we've seen politically a lot of turmoil that's spilled down economically. I mean, the tariff news caused markets to plummet. In the spring of this year, the markets have since rallied, and we're starting to see some more volatility again. But the key questions I'd say for everybody listening and on how to invest, depending on what bucket it's for, is what is my objective, what is my time horizon, and what is my risk tolerance. Those three things really guide me as an advisor in helping somebody know how to invest. Somebody that's extremely nervous about markets and in retirement may not want to have a lot of money in stocks. They certainly should have some, but they may not be able to withstand the volatility. Somebody conversely that's 20 years old that is got investing in their 401k at work and has 40 some years until retirement, they have a much greater ability to take on risk, and they should be in all equities. The important thing I'd say to remember is that markets, the peaks and valleys occur, and in any given year, actually, the charts show that we can have huge drawdowns. The COVID year is a great example. Markets were down over 30% in 1 month, and they end up double digit in a year. So, markets, it's a again that that the trajectory is up over the long term if you look at the S&P, but we've seen many different market disruptions. And I think, the best way to build wealth is slowly over time. And you as an individual are going to be the biggest risk to your success, meaning by panicking, taking your money out, really stay the course. Know what your objective is, your time horizon, and your risk, and invest accordingly. And that's why folks like me exist. I'd say we help keep you on track and prevent you from making big mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to call out because your age, your risk tolerance is going to be so different where I support my parents and my college age nieces and nephews a bit with some of the decisions. And so for my parents who are older, I'm like, just don't withdraw anything right now. Just keep it if you don't need it. And then with my college nieces and nephews, I'm like, put more money in. It's very different, right? It's going to be very different based on someone's goals, where they're at in life, and then what's important to them at the time.
Yeah, and I think it does circle back to, knowing yourself and knowing what your relationship with money is, and understanding those things. You might need more hand holding, and you may not. But it's knowing yourself, and it's a very individualized, there's some broad guidelines we give, but it's very much comes down to the individual, what they're comfortable with, what's important to you, and what you want out of your life, money being a big part of that story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious, are there any resources or recommendations of books that our audience can use to get more educated and empowered over their finances?
Yeah, we covered a lot of things today. I'll give a plug for a few resources that I think could be helpful. One that I love, there's a Morgan Housel. So he's written two books recently. The Psychology of Money is a great one that just talks about, just a lot of what we're talking about, themes, how, our stories influence our habits. His newest book is the Art of Spending Money. And that's a great one that really looks at, how individuals across different economic backgrounds, why they spend as they do, and just some themes. So that would be a great, for folks that want to dig deeper. Wired for Wealth is a great book by Brad Klontz. That's another great one that did those money scripts. And Ramit Chetty, I like his work too. I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He also had a Netflix series where he profiled couples, which was fun to watch a few years ago. But he talks about spending where your values are. We all have different views on what's important to us. For some, it might be travel. For others, it might be eating out. And so spending with what's important to you. For basics of investing, I like the Book of Common Sense Investing by Jack Bogle. I worked at Vanguard years ago. That's a good one if somebody wants to get educated. And there's just so many podcasts out there too. that, Tori Dunlap is another. Just, I would encourage anybody to, get educated and, play around whatever you're, and budgeting. You Need a Budget is a good app. I'll give a plug in Monarch Money.
I love all these different resources, right? Because even when it comes to goals, like that could be a part of one of their goals is just more education. Before we wrap up, we do have quite a few clients and quite a few people probably watching or listening that are employed and have some employee benefits. And I think this is often a resource that's overlooked and underutilized. What are some tips that you have for people related maybe to utilizing some of the employee benefits that they have to help with their money goals?
Yeah, I'd say for any small business owners, the Secure Act gave a lot of great tax credits to small business owners that are looking to get started in setting up employee retirement plans. There's a lot of great providers out there, 401go, Vestwell, Guideline, which I think merged with Gusto now, but the bottom line is the costs have come down so much that, it really is not going to be cost prohibitive at all for employers to have these benefits for clients. So it's a great retention tool. You can set guidelines and parameters on how much, the vesting schedules, how much you're contributing, all of that. But that or, a SEP plan. Like I said, I have a number of self-employed individuals that are, they in guidance with their tax advisor are sacking away money that would otherwise pay taxes for their own futures. So, look at those things. There are some great tax credits that are out there for small businesses to attract and retain employees through employee benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Do you have any last words of wisdom to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'd say it's never too late to get started. I think this whole talk is about awareness, knowing yourself, knowing what's important to you. We're in a life journey of discovering what's important to us, what our soul's calling is. And money can really empower us to help lift others, other women successfully, the next generation. If it was late for you in your life, you can give back and encourage, the next generation to get started sooner. But you start where you are, and it's never too late to get started on this journey. Money does come freedom. And, I think that's something, especially as women, that we all strive for.
Yeah, and that's such a great call out. It's that it's never too late. So the effort you put in now can definitely make a huge impact for the future, however close it is or however far away it is, just being able to at least get started somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tressa, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on my website, anchorpointwealthadvisors.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and please reach out. And I do work with folks on a flat fee and for financial planning work only and ongoing investment management. So happy to connect with anybody that wants to talk further and explore.
Yeah, and I'll include those links wherever you're watching this. They'll be able to access all the links, whether it's on YouTube or our website.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was fun talking about a topic that's near to my heart, and I know to yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I love talking about money. All right, this workshop was brought to you by Uplift. Our purpose is to create a world where every workplace is a thriving environment, and we do this through interactive and engaging trainings, starting with our mental health first aid course. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about how you can shift your organization towards people first workplaces, reach out to us at upliftlearningsolutions.com.